Sign in, it's in the back there. Flyer. This is a community meeting being held by the Nottingham Water Alliance, and to talk about Warrant Article 26, March 16th town meeting. It's the last warrant article of the day, and we want people to hang in there. It can be difficult. It's the Freedom from Chemical Trespass Rights Based Ordinance. I'd like to introduce, or have everybody else here. I don't think I introduced myself. My name is Gwen Friend. I'm on the committee. I'm from Nottingham. And people can introduce
Peter
themselves.
White, Whites Grove Road. Bill Simone, North River Lake Road.
John Terninko, Case Road.
And we also have a guest.
Michelle Sanborn, I'm from Alexandria, New Hampshire.
Representing Zelda.
Yes, representing Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund.
And we're talking about the event on Saturday, which is after Election Day.
Right.
That's when the town meeting has its activity. And we unfortunately are the last item on the agenda, so please stay or go away and come back. So, why are we concerned about hazardous waste? Well, a bit of trivia that's kind of powerful to me is there's over 850 hazardous waste sites in New Hampshire. There's 22 sites that are identified as Superfund sites. And the most dramatic one that's been talked about quite a bit is the Coakley landfill in Northampton and Greenfield. And that's because there are 7 kids surrounding, not all in one location, but surrounding where that site is, that have a pretty nasty cancer that's very rare for young kids, and one of them's already died. I went to Hampton's meeting talking about what's going on, and it was a mixed audience. Some of the people loved the landfill, Superfund site, and most of the people did not. Now, with the hazards that seem to be happening to the kids, there's no direct link identified, but it's suspicious that they're surrounding the site. And I guess that's enough. The purpose of our article is to protect the town for hazardous waste sites. So if we say it is not possible, it's a lot easier to do that than to fight a site that is possibly doing something damaging. USA Springs was pumping water on Route 4, and they were warned about a site next to them that had hazardous waste, and after 2 days of pumping, the hazardous waste was sucked in from the neighboring site into the groundwater. And it actually tainted one of the houses further down the road, and they bought that house. So that's an interesting demonstration of how sensitive what's happening under the ground is. Right now, Nottingham has a lot of water, and it's clean, and we'd like to help keep it that way. So we would like you to, on Saturday, the 16th, vote yes for this article. And I think that's all I have to say at the moment.
Okay. Bill Shimoni again. I want to jump in here and talk about a little about some of the bad things that have happened that I know everybody knows some aspects about, but I don't know if anybody knows that New Hampshire is number one in the nation, number one for pediatric cancer, and that's as a result of that cancer cluster. But we're also number two for breast cancer. Right now, we have a problem in Merrimack and Bedford, and it's a direct result of the PFAS leaching out of St. Gabains. There's a lot of denial, as there is, and if you remember the W.R. Grace problem in Woburn, Massachusetts, went on for decade after decade with W.R. Grace, a chemical company, denying over and over with deep pockets and a lot of lawyers, this is not our problem, we did not do that. And they finally were found out. A brave couple of people turned in some documents, and they were fined. Unfortunately, a lot of people died. One of my relatives, my mother's sister, died from breast cancer, and she lived in that town in Woburn. There's also been denials, famous place, Camp Lejeune. Everybody knows Camp Lejeune, a training place for military people, where people have gotten rare cancers as well, and that denial has gone on for decades. So when you have a problem, you have years and years, decades and decades sometimes of denial. You have lack of treatment because no one's going to pick up the cost. You have lack of cleanup because no one has been identified. Prove that we did it. Prove that we did it. That's really sad, but that's the way things are. What we think is a great way to go forward, and because we, as well as 10 other towns, have instituted rights-based ordinances, is to have an ounce of prevention. And that's worth a pound of cure, so that if you prevent companies from coming in and contaminating your water, your ground, you don't have to spend money cleaning up. You don't have to spend years in litigation with denials, with deep pockets of large corporations fighting to find out what is the truth. You don't have to do any of that because you have prevented it. It's like a chipper. When your chipper jams, you shut it off. Prevention. You don't stick your hand in and try to clear the chipper, and there's no cure for a ground-up hand. Sorry for being graphic.
That's a very good analogy.
Yeah, it's a great analogy. So the last thing I want to say is we don't know what the future holds. Back when I was in college, the Clean Water Act was passed 1972, and it was the result of legislation that had started in 1948. Believe it or not, that was actually before this old person was born. Now, I have recently read that the Clean Water Act is going to be looked at and analyzed this next fall in the session by the Supreme Court. And why might that be important? Well, I think from what I've read is some of the things that they're going to look at is who's responsible. And here again, if there is no company polluting our systems, there is no responsibility. There is no bad contamination. And I'll close by saying, would you buy a house in Bedford or Merrimack that had dirty water? If you lived there, could you sell your house in Bedford or Merrimack to anybody in their right mind? And if you were facing cancers as a result of it and fighting with insurance companies, trying to get your loved ones treatment, and having to pay taxes on a house that was realistically worth zero, what would your life be like? We want to prevent that. My heart goes out to all those people that have suffered. I've known it in my family. I'd like to keep the suffering to a minimum and not have it occur here. So if you would vote for this rights-based ordinance, do you want clean water? Do you want to prevent dirty water? It's pretty simple to me. Number 26, last on the agenda, Article 26, please vote yes for us.
You just reminded me of something I wanted to say, and that is that Pease Air Force Base was supplying stuff for the Coakley landfill, and they have now identified that Pease, because of their firefighting equipment, has contaminated one of the biggest ground water systems underneath Pease, and they're asking people to identify anybody who might have lived on base to see how damaged they got. Kind of after the fact, and you can't tell me that they didn't understand that they were contaminating the groundwater.
A couple of things I wanted to just add to all of this, and then I'd like to introduce Michelle to speak a little bit. I want you to talk a little bit about Nottingham's history, and I haven't been living here like straight through. I kind of took a break for a very long time and came back, but Nottingham has the oldest continuously operating recycling center in the country, which I think is huge. When I saw that, like in the Boston paper when I was living in Boston at the time, I was like, oh my God, Nottingham. So I think, this town has a great history of trying to take care of issues like this. And it includes also a great deal of conservation land that the Conservation Commission very carefully monitors. And then we do have clean water still. As being part of the committee, I've done a little bit of research, not a lot, and water contamination is a huge issue. There is one particular chemical, which is in Teflon, which I saw a movie with John the other night, shows that 99% of the people in the world, they think, now have that chemical in their blood, whereas in World War II, which was like, they were able to get some blood that had been preserved since World War II from the soldiers, did not have this chemical. So it's a fairly recent thing, and it is a hazardous chemical. So it's very scary to think that we live up here in Nottingham, which is, rural and theoretically pretty pristine, but it's very scary to think of people dumping water in such a way that it gets into our soil, into our water, groundwater, and into our wells, as well as into the air. Some of these chemicals put off particles into the air, and that can be...
And the courts supported that they could continue dumping that into the rivers.
Yeah. So, like everyone's been saying here, prevention. But I do think Nottingham has a great history for this kind of stuff, and I'd like to see it continue with this ordinance.
Get your friends to come to the town meeting.
And stay. They can sleep.
Or come at the end and vote.
Come back.
Yeah, come back.
In favor of this RBO.
So it's it's called the Rights Based Ordinance, and I'm going to ask Michelle, talk a little bit maybe more about that.
Sure. So my name is Michelle Sanborn, and I'm with Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund. In full transparency, I'm not a lawyer. I work with we say CELDEF for short, so if I'm saying CELDEF, I'm referring to Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund, because that's a bit of a mouthful. So I work for them as a community organizer. And I do this because really in my own community, this got me started. So I live in Alexandria, New Hampshire, as I mentioned, very rural. No industry really exists there. And we had, a corporate development threaten our area, which would have contaminated our watershed. And it was an eye-opener for us to realize that we really weren't the decision makers in our community that we thought we were. We thought that we could provide enough evidence and say that this is not a good idea, and that we would be able to say no, and that our town officials would be able to say no, and our state legislators would be able to say no. And what we discovered is that that's not the case. What we discovered is that state law, through regulations, actually legalizes harms. What we perceive to be harms in our community, because it's affecting our water quality, our air quality, our soil quality and such, and even the quality of our everyday lives. So, and property values as well. So through that process, we adopted a rights-based ordinance in my community. I co-led that effort in 2014 and did so with a number of communities surrounding that were also impacted by this particular project. What we experienced in our case, even after the developer had filed with the Site Evaluation Committee for a permit, was that after those towns adopted these rights-based ordinances, it actually caused the developer to eventually back away. So what that showed me personally was that there's one way to go about it, which is what Nottingham did back in 2008, which was to attempt to go through what we call the regulatory or the statutory, the lawmaking way, where the state says that you can appeal permits and go to hearings and say your piece, but it doesn't really make a difference at the end of the day. So to back up, the work started in New Hampshire in 2006 with Barnstead passing the first rights-based ordinance to protect their water. And the reason why it's called a rights-based ordinance is because it's based on your inherent and inalienable right to self-govern and to determine that if this is harmful in your community, you have a right to say no to it, to actually prohibit the activity based on your inherent and inalienable right to a quality of life, clean air, clean water, clean soil. Nottingham followed suit. When Barnstead did that in 2006, Nottingham followed in 2008. But before Nottingham did that, the community, the municipality spent almost $500,000 fighting through that regulatory process, trying to appeal those permits. It wasn't until the rights-based ordinance was adopted that those expenses then did not continue to incur as far as the rights-based ordinance was concerned. The citizens defended that ordinance by notifying interested developers in that property for USA Springs that this is a law and we intend to defend it. And eventually that drove USA Springs into bankruptcy. So that credit goes to the citizens of Nottingham. The same is true with many of these other communities. And I use this when I speak to other communities now about this work, not only what we accomplished in my own region, but what was accomplished here is huge. It's absolutely huge. Democracy is not a spectator sport, if you will. It does require participation, and it's the citizens of Nottingham that caused that success story. Not the law in and of itself. You know, the law is important, but a law is only as good as it is enforced, and it's only as good as it is believed in, if you will. So think about, it was once illegal for me as a woman to vote. That was the perception. That was considered acceptable. That was considered reasonable. When women began to cast a vote, really commit acts of civil disobedience, if you will, it changed people's perception over time. It took a long time, but it changed people's perception. And so those women who fought for our right to vote had the perception that I should be able to vote. It's my right to vote. I'm a human being. So that perception is important. And understanding that the law is based on your inherent and inalienable rights, and being able to get beyond that sort of black hole of doubt that you don't have authority to do this, which is what most of the world is telling us, that you can't do this at the local level. But passing a rights-based ordinance is in harmony with the New Hampshire State Constitution. We actually have an article called The Right of Revolution, which talks about when government is no longer serving its purpose, which is to protect us, then we have a right and a duty to alter, abolish, amend, and form a new government. I'm paraphrasing, but the gist of it is that, and rights are a higher law than the form of government that says, so many parts per million of a certain contaminant are okay to have in your water. So it's actually legalizing poisoning. It's really what it's doing, which makes it very difficult for the citizens of a community and very difficult for a municipality to stand up against that in court. So the rights-based ordinance changes the narrative around that to say that we're not looking at the state saying that this amount of harm is okay through that permit. What we're doing is we're saying we have a right to have water that's not contaminated. We have a right to not be poisoned. It changes the narrative around that.
All right, I'd like to, I don't know, I think it's time to let people ask questions.
Sure.
So
Any questions in the audience?
What are your questions? We know you have questions.
Thank you for the hearing. My name is Chris Albert, 36 Stage Road. I've been living in town for over 30 years now. Work for a consulting engineering firm, do a lot of water treatment design, worked on hazardous waste sites.
Great.
And I guess you kind of hit it on your head is, I guess my issue with the way the warrant article is set up, you're not following the state's ambient groundwater quality standards. You've set it upon yourself that the standard should be 0. Is that what?
I wouldn't say that's exactly, but you're right.
I mean, we have
saying-
multiple pages that have to violate the MCL, the maximum concentration level
Right.
Yep.
of a certain particulate. And again, those are scientifically based studies on health and human services of after 30 years of how many gallons per day somebody can drink. And again,
And get sick.
But I think
sick and die,
well,
so-
there are a couple of things about. One is that the standards for water quality have changed over time.
right,
getting
and I've
tighter.
got the current, and they're readopting the rules right now
Right.
for PFAS, because we're going to talk
PFAS
about
being the
PFAS.
biggie,
So we're going to
yeah.
talk about PFAS.
Go ahead.
So again, how do you fulfill that you're going to challenge yourself in a court when you have no scientific backup to prove that your 0 standard is the right standard?
So there are, and again, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not providing any legal advice whatsoever. But there's nothing within the Rights Based Ordinance that sets a standard, meaning there are no regulations within the Rights Based Ordinance. It's affirming a right. It's not having a conversation about whether the regulations should be one level versus another level. I was actually in Concord today, sitting in on a hearing regarding PFAS levels. And it was interesting listening to a professor of law from Vermont Law School sit there and talk about regulations take too long. These studies take too long. Litigation takes too long. By the time all of that gets played out, multiple people are sick and dead. And so the idea of, coming up with regulations when it is used as a minimum level of protection is a good thing. It takes a long time, but it's a good thing to set that minimum. What is important is for communities to then be able to take that minimum floor and then be able to go and expand beyond that and afford something more protective for their communities than what the state and federal government allow. So the state and federal government certainly serve a purpose in setting minimum standards of safety, but we have a right to set standards of safety that are greater than what maybe the state and federal government afford.
Another way to respond back to what you're saying is, we're basically saying it's 0 contamination.
Okay, do you realize in all drinking water, there's no such thing?
That's true.
So, so I guess enforcement says any business, entity, or government. Now in your title, you've got corporations. You've added that. So I've got a public water system in town that is pulling uranium out of the water and putting it back in the leach fields. So should we go after this public water system for this residential subdivision and have them shut down?
This is in Nottingham?
Yep, there's public, and then you have 2.
They have a public system within a development,
Yep,
and they're pulling uranium.
they've got low levels.
Filtering it
So
out.
it's below the MCL, but again, you said it doesn't matter, so their MCL is 2. The level for uranium's 30. So again, these people live in this condominium association, whatever, so you're not worried about
I don't
that.
think this would apply.
But
unless
you have
you've
right
got a
here, corporation.
Well, who's the corporation?
It's an LLC, it's a public water system,
Oh, it is an LLC, okay.
yeah.
Public or private as an LLC?
Private, doesn't matter.
It's a public water system. I'm
It's a
like,
public water
LLC would not
system.
be a public water system.
It's a public water system under a cooperative.
Right, it's not a municipal water system.
Yeah, it's
Using
still-
the term public meaning municipal.
You're safe, it's too late.
Yeah.
Huh?
You're safe, it's too late.
too late.
It's not
We're worried
retroactive.
about contamination, period. It doesn't matter if it's ongoing. Shouldn't we care about that?
Yes.
Well, so,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So-
Chris,
Yeah.
if I could address the overarching concern that you bring up, and I think you do a lot of great work, and it's important. When we moved to Epping, we had water doctors look at the house that we were buying, and it had levels of arsenic that were just slightly above, and we ended up putting in multiple tanks to filter and refilter the water, and it was great. But we decided we didn't want to live there and didn't keep the house even a year. We left. But if you think back to when I was younger, and maybe you've seen these, I can't tell your age, but I'm 100. So I remember commercials where doctors said, this Chesterfield, it's mild and it makes you feel good. Where Olympic athletes said, this cigarette makes me able to run and jump and I am great. And you had decade after decade of allowable standards of tobacco use, while the tobacco companies were inserting in the tobacco that was being used chemical after additional chemical after additional chemical to increase the level of addiction to tobacco. And it wasn't until there was a couple of whistleblowers where it all came down like a house of cards. And there's still, to this day, are people who cannot quit smoking tobacco. And now, because there aren't any standards set, there's companies like Juul, which is a multi-billion-dollar company. This is allowable. Government says we can have Juul, which is a vaping cigarette device that allows children, adolescents, because this is not regulated as to the age that a kid can buy vaping devices, allows them to buy these vapes and become addicted to nicotine, which leads to a new population to give money to the vaping companies in the billions and billions. Just because something is allowed doesn't mean it's good. It was allowed to have thalidomide, and I don't know if you recall, but in the 60s, they said, hey, here's a new chemical. We've invented, the chemical companies, we've got thalidomide, and it's going to be something that we're going to give women who are pregnant and are having morning sickness, and this is going to take morning sickness away. And then thalidomide babies started being born with half an arm, 2 arms missing, half a leg, thalidomide babies. But there was not a direct link. Oh, there wasn't proof. This was allowable. And what we're considering here is that, sure, this thing's buried. Some guy brought in a whole bunch of machines and buried them in somebody's yard, and they're leaking into some poor son of a gun's granite aquifer and contaminating. We can't change that. We can't go back. We're not asking, hey, let's make all of Nottingham a Superfund and clean it up. But what we are saying is, let's not make some company, let's not allow some company to come in here and contaminate the water, even if it's allowable by some standard that was set, because it was set to have tobacco to be allowable. It was set to have arsenic to be allowable.
I understand what you're saying.
You
I
get the
guess
drift.
my
Just because it's set
concern
at a
about,
certain level
I'm concerned
doesn't
about
mean
my
it's
warrant
safe.
article, again,
Sure.
concern your warrant article, it says the government. So Pawtucket State Park, they have a public water system, and they have violations at time to time. Are you going to shut the state park down?
I don't think this article is aimed at water systems. I think it's aimed at.
But it's contamination, though.
No, but it's,
Well, I think,
Contamination.
I don't think it's
They have
kind of,
coliform hits. They have nitrate hits
I'm
that
sure.
come out of there.
right, well, we're not addressing water systems. We're addressing
You're
companies,
talking-
government agencies that will come in.
That's the
and
state park. It's a government agency.
Can
It
I-
says in here that if the town of Nottingham doesn't enforce it, then I'm gonna get a civil action against the state of New Hampshire.
Can I interject here? The state of New Hampshire, anyone can sue anyone for anything at any time. That is the
But
current.
you're giving
Hang on.
enabling
Hang
legislation.
on a moment. That is the current structure of the system. The rights-based ordinance does not change that in any way, shape, or form. You can still sue anyone for anything at any time, whether it's a corporation, whether it's a government, whether it's an individual. So the rights-based ordinance, all throughout the state of New Hampshire thus far, over the past 12 years, maybe 13, Not one of those has resulted in a frivolous lawsuit. Not one of them has actually resulted in a lawsuit. What they have done is they have existed to protect their ecosystems and their clean air, water, and soil, in the sense of typically it is triggered by a particular threat that is coming into the community. Not always. Farnstead did it proactively or prohibitively, if you will, or preventatively, there we go. And other communities have done the same. So it's not always a direct threat. Often that is what triggers communities to reach out to CELDF and ask for a pathway to be able to protect themselves. So this is not changing that pathway in the sense of it's not going to lead to additional lawsuits. It hasn't thus far. It's been over 10 years, and there have been no, frivolous lawsuits.
But again, this is a bill that you're putting into effect that would give the town of Nottingham responsibility. So I guess my final question then, what are you going to do about the Nottingham landfill, which is this discharging PFAS
Is it?
into the river system? I've got the
It's not,
September 19, 2018
Sure.
report.
it's not
that's exceeding.
retrospective.
Let me,
It's not
I want to hear,
retrospective. It's
Yeah,
prospective.
the landfill is pushing out PFAS into our water system.
And that should be worked on.
And the selectmen are working on that.
Yeah.
Okay, but
So how many more of these situations do we want? Do we want to allow more chemical trespass into our town? Have more?
all I'm saying is you're
problems to
opening
clean
up a Pandora's box.
Well, let me ask, do you trust the federal government to protect the water? in
No,
Nottingham?
I have my
Well,
own
let me
well,
ask,
and
do you trust the state of New Hampshire
I
to
don't
protect
trust
the water?
anybody.
How about
I
the
don't write
people?
warrant articles to,
See, this purpose of this rights-based ordinance is to empower the people of Nottingham to protect our drinking water. That's what this is for. We're not going
and
to
I'm
blindly
concerned
trust
about
the state.
that you've opened it
Yeah,
up for
excuse me.
people.
We have
You've op-
850, contaminated areas around the state of New Hampshire. It
Right,
would
and
be
I've worked on
foolish
probably
to
a
trust the
bunch
state
of
of New
them.
Hampshire to protect us at this point. Otherwise, we wouldn't have
You
850.
gotta understand the science wasn't there. The PFAS, everyone talks about PFAS. We're measuring things in parts per trillion.
Right.
The labs couldn't do that. We used to deal with parts per million. Now I'm dealing with parts per billion for arsenic reductions.
And I imagine you know that the federal government has allowed 85,000 chemicals to be used in processes around the country. Only 15,000 of those chemicals have been tested for their
I've
effects
got
on
a whole
human beings.
book on that, yep.
So no, I don't trust the federal government, and I don't trust the state government, who's.
Well, I don't
run
trust
by
local
energy.
government either, though.
So
I
what
trust the
would you
people of
do?
the
What
town
is
of
it-
Nottingham.
Wait,
I-
how about we change the conversation a little bit?
It should be based on science and law and not your own personal opinion.
No, what we're saying is we would like to discourage organizations for dumping.
We've pretty much shut this town of any kind of commercial development. This town is dead. This is a bedroom community, it's all it's ever gonna be.
Along
You
Route
lost
4.
your hardware store a little while ago, you lost your lumber yard, you've got two little country stores that are barely surviving. So those are businesses, so if they start discharging bad groundwater, you're gonna go after them and shut down the last two stores we have?
If they're harming the community, why should they be allowed to do that?
Yeah,
I mean,
Well, where do you
any
drudge the
entity.
line, though, between the guy in the general store, the public water system, or your house,
Yeah.
and you're contaminated? Do you understand when you have Gore-Tex clothes and you wash Gore-Tex clothes in your laundry, you're putting PFAS in your leach field? And you're contaminating the ground?
I just learned that, but
Right. I think we should all just learn to worry about ourselves a little bit more, too, on what we're doing in our own residential home.
That's true.
That would be
Do you have an
irresponsible.
idea on how to pull that off?
What about worrying
Because
about the
I
rest of
don't.
our town and the rest of our state and the rest of our nation? Shouldn't we care about those? Our neighbors, our children,
Right.
other people's children? Shouldn't we care? Shouldn't we protect them? Shouldn't we take action as citizens? That's what we're doing.
This is to protect us going forward. We're not going after people who already have a problem in existence.
I know, but I
That will
worry
be
about a
dealt
law
with.
getting written, that
However-
it opens up the
however-
Pandora's box to
Well,
other people
however-
bitching about somebody else.
The box is already open with all these
If I could-
chemicals.
If I could make just one more point, Chris, and I know you're a well-educated guy, and you understand water. There's been a lot of fracking going on around the country. And when you do fracking, you use a lot of water, and you'll use machines. And the water gets so dirty and so contaminated, you gotta take it away, because it will destroy the machines that you're using to frack.
And then the natural gas
granted-
from there is coming up to New Hampshire, being
Well, let me
used by the
finish.
consumers here. Should we care about those communities being fracked?
Let me finish. What we don't want to have is a large multi-billion-dollar fracking company who needs a place to put their dirty, rotten, poisonous water to come up to Nottingham and buy a tract of land and say, let's just inject it. Oh, this is safe. This is safe because we can put in a little core and inject this filthy, poisonous water into your ground that, oh, don't worry about it. It's not going to leach into your granite aquifer. We want to prevent that from happening. And if that multi-billion-dollar company sees an RBO in advance, they'll go to some other town who needs the money, just like the uranium dumping companies, just like some of the other toxic dumpers. They have to go somewhere, but they shouldn't come to Nottingham. And I think we want to stay safe.
Also say that I think if something happened, let's say we discovered that Timmins was polluting whatever river is either, or whatever. What stuff from there was getting into the water system, into the groundwater system. I don't think we're gonna go after them with $1 billion lawsuit. We're gonna go talk to Corey and say, we think this is coming as a result of whatever that's happening in the store here. What can we do? Figure it out. It's not, I mean, I agree, there's a problem.
I just,
With
my
this-
fear is that you've opened up Pandora's box.
See, I don't
That's- Yeah, but you never know, my neighbor's doing something, I'm gonna go after my neighbor.
But
it's only
is your neighbor a
corporation.
The RBO
business?
doesn't
We're
It's
talking
not-
about
that's not
how this is designed.
businesses.
But we just said a public water system is a corporation, it's a business. So after this gets done, I'm
think
gonna
it's
go
pretty
after
clear.
that subdivision that has uranium in the water, I guess.
Well, and you can do that now anyway.
But you gave me enabling legislation to do that.
But yeah, and so the process that goes through is no different than it goes through now, meaning the courts are going to look at all the things that go into, let's say, a challenge, right? So what is that, I mean, especially as a plaintiff, the burden is upon you, the proof. So if you're a resident and you're going up against, as an individual, maybe you feel like you're the only one harmed, it's not likely to happen because I don't think most individual residents have resources to do that. Generally, what this is doing is empowering the community as a whole. And what I'm seeing more and more in Concord is the awareness among state representatives that these are statewide issues of concern. And the idea of just regulating them and allowing it to continue, St. Gobain is still pumping those toxin emissions into the air, which land in the water, in the soil, and the contamination is continuing. The scientific evidence says if that stopped 100% today, it could potentially take decades before the levels in their blood would even reach half.
Right.
That's if it was 100%
And the groundwater
stopped.
trust is putting over, how many millions of dollars to put water down there?
Which comes back to the point of the state reps are beginning to recognize the harm needs to stop. It needs to stop.
But just the
As
harm was there
opposed
for
to
40 years now.
Right, so it needs to stop, and no new harms need to,
They're working on that
continue to
new
be
design
allowed.
right now. I was at the State House too, testifying on those bills.
And a lot of this is about setting limits of allowable harm. So the hearing today was about PFAS, and they're right now, the rule, it's not a law, the rule is 70 parts per trillion. In Vermont, it's 20. Why is it 20 in Vermont and 70 in New Hampshire? Who decides that? What scientific evidence is that based on?
Well, right now, it's EPA 70.
Questionable to me.
Yeah, and I think New
and to many
Jersey's even
people.
lower.
Right, so the question becomes, how is that scientific evidence? What justifies that one is okay in one state and one level is okay in another state when we're all human beings? Where's the logic in that? Where is the science in that? So there's an awareness that is growing, and which kind of brings me to this, the state level work of introducing a state constitutional amendment to recognize the right of local self-government so that communities at the state level are specifically enumerated with the right to be able to make these determinations at the local level. Last year, 1/3 of the House supported that amendment. It requires a 3/5 vote of support from the House to move to the Senate. requires another 3/5 vote from that before it moves to the ballot, to the people, which then requires a 2/3 vote. The point being, there's a growing awareness that it needs to stop. And so, yeah, I mean, we understand and recognize that there are contaminants in our water and in our environment. And I think, to use the term reasonable, most reasonable human beings acknowledge that. But when you have pediatric cancer clusters and second in the nation for breast cancer, that's pretty significant, and it's very relevant to give a pathway for people to say, that's not okay. It's not even a matter of not wanting it, it's just not okay. And it's gotta stop at some point,
Well,
which is
luckily-
where communities are coming from.
Luckily, we've had no refineries upgrading upwind of us. Thank you for your time.
Thanks.
Thank you, Chris.
Appreciate it, yeah.
Chris, good questions.
Very good.
Please come forward.
There's another Chris, but you should introduce yourself.
Oh, it's being recorded, and that microphone is,
Free country.
Yeah, you need the microphone.
hopefully that microphone is working. It wasn't working last
Yes.
night too well, but.
I'm just curious, can you hear me?
Supposed to be pushing it?
It's on, I think it's just on. Okay.
As to how many towns? You said maybe 13 years towns have been doing this. And I just wondered how many towns, if you happen to know.
Yeah, so there's 11 towns that have adopted binding rights-based ordinances. There's probably close to a couple of dozen that have presented rights-based ordinances, and in some cases, they didn't pass. And in total, I want to say that there's either 13 actual ordinances. So my town actually adopted 2 rights-based ordinances. And Nottingham would be looking at, this would be a second rights-based ordinance. So some communities have adopted more than one.
And are you going to be at the meeting, the town meeting?
I will be, I was there last
Yeah.
year.
As a guest to answer questions that we don't have the background.
After we
Right.
get permission that she's allowed to talk.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
Not
that's
a
right.
resident, I'm not a resident.
Well,
so-
I just think it's really helpful because you have all that information and for people to hear that it's not really as radical as maybe it sounds when you read
Well-
it, and people get worried about all the little, understandably, the
Sure.
details, but all these other towns have done it, and it seems to be a trend.
We've done it.
It is,
Yeah,
it is a trend.
exactly, and that it hasn't opened Pandora's
I kind of
box.
view this as overly optimistic, that this is the beginning of a transformation for society to recognize that it's stupid to pollute.
Yeah.
Yeah, seems obvious.
Well, it does, it seems obvious. Don't kill your future. I know that, not right now today, but right now, Toledo has an ordinance that's going to be voted on, and it's the right of Lake Erie. When I was in college, Lake Erie caught on fire. It was a big joke.
So the
Don't go to Ohio.
Cuyahoga River, too.
Yeah, the Cuyahoga River. It even made it into a couple of songs. They cleaned it up, but now it's having problems with cyanobacteria, which is an ancient bacteria. But because of the fact that you can clean up a body of water, but if you don't keep on it, the things that come in from fertilizer and animal wastes, et cetera, you'll have these blooms, these algae blooms. They're green, they're red, they're whatever color it is. And they're all over the world because it is ancient. They're in the Mediterranean Sea. But that doesn't mean you don't want to clean them up. So the good people of Toledo, Ohio, are going to be facing this issue. And I think, Michelle, what are the other places around the world that are starting to take control of their water that have contacted SALDEF for assistance?
Yeah, so due to the work in a little borough in Pennsylvania called Tamaqua, they were the first ones to recognize rights of nature or rights of ecosystems within their community. And Ecuador took notice of that. Reached out to SALDEF and said, will you assist us in working on finding a way to codify that within our constitution or within our governing documents. So a number of nations have reached out, even indigenous communities, the Ho-Chunk Nation, and just recently recognizing the rights of rice. So this is a staple for an indigenous tribe, and it has, spiritual connections, but it also has their livelihood connection. So the idea of codifying this into law is really, if you think about it, even for our own country, we exist because of acts of civil disobedience. Like, we separated from British rule, and that was based on the right to determine our own futures and to be able to use a governing process to do that. So these other nations are recognizing that. It's always been a part of their culture, more so than I would say ours, but recognizing that by codifying it in particular, it gives them a different standing through the legal system that we currently have.
Didn't Brazil protect the river?
Yeah, so there's been a number of recognitions of ecosystems
So
in particular.
they passed a law that the river has the right to be clean.
Yeah.
And to flow, sometimes that includes like flowing, naturally, not being, redirected in an unnatural way. This is about, ecosystems thriving and existing and flourishing as they were intended to, because our existence depends on the capacity of nature to sustain us. Nature doesn't need us to sustain itself. We need nature.
Well, I was raised in Newark, and when I was a kid, you could actually see stars.
Wow.
And fireflies.
Right.
I just want to make a couple quick points, if I may. And the first one, I think everybody is aware of how much pollution that we have across the country and across the planet. Even in Nottingham, we have a few problems. But at this point, with global warming and climate change, I mean, we as human beings have to do two things. Number one, we have to stop the pollution. And that's what this ordinance is to do, prevent more pollution. And that is by far the easiest thing for us to do. The other thing we have to do is clean up all this pollution and plastics in the ocean. I mean, it's a huge amount of cleaning up we have to do, which should lead to full employment for our children. But once again, it's a lot more costly. It's a lot harder to clean up pollution once it's there. So that's what we're trying to do, is prevent any further pollution in Nottingham. That's what this ordinance is for, at least, to protect our water.
Yeah.
The second point I'd like to make is that it's really only citizen action that's going to protect we the people locally and nationally. And you can look at almost everything that's been done, especially the last 50 years, it's been citizen action that has accomplished the positive changes in our society. And when people don't get involved, that's when the corporate polluters, the oil companies, the pharmaceutical companies, whoever, that's where they've been able to run rampage over our consumers and our environment. So people have to get involved. And when you take on these energy monopolies, they have an incredible amount of power. They got money, excuse the pun, they got money, they're big companies. But here we had the Northern Pass battle. And I would certainly think myself that would have been very different as if all those hundreds and hundreds of people who came out to those hearings to testify had stayed home. How do you think that would have come out? I think it would have been a very different result. So yeah, they found plenty of reasons to say no to Northern Pass, but they're allowing the dredging of Great Bay because not enough people wanted to oppose it. And that dredging of Great Bay is going to create a lot of environmental problems there for those, it's bringing up a lot of, stuff. It's going to pollute the oyster beds that they've seeded Great Bay with. So anyways, that's my point, is that when people get involved, we can make a difference, and we better get involved to make a difference.
If you like what we're saying, you might have seen that there's this on the desk when you came in. I have more copies if you want, and there's a flip side to that information. So spread the word and help us.
Yes.
Yes, please, come up.
Yeah, no, we're not.
No.
We're here for you.
Okay. I don't mean to interrupt, but.
No, that's all I had to say.
Okay. All right. Well, Sarah Chapman, 150.
And I see you have one.
Got one. Thank you. Sarah Chapman, 151 Round Pond Road. And I'm thankful for all the work that you're all doing. And I'm under the impression that most of us here are in favor of this. I went to my first town meeting last year because of this, and I couldn't comprehend why it didn't pass. It blew my mind. I'm just curious, If you've had any experience collecting, aside from things like this, because clearly all those people that were against it aren't here, and had questions that stopped them from voting yes. Have you found effective ways to collect I guess I'm speaking mostly to you, but the people that are concerned about it, like their concerns? Like, I'm curious if we can find a way. I'm worried that it won't pass, and then another year, and
One of the
then
mistakes we made last year
yeah,
is the ordinance was too complicated.
yeah,
This is a lot simpler to read, and there's only one topic associated with it.
yeah,
And the other is that it's at the end of the day, and a lot of people chose not to hang around that long.
right.
And so the thing we have to do is get people to hang around longer or come back, guess when the final event, which is ours,
Yeah.
happens.
Yeah, I have an idea on that. I wonder if there's like a group text could be set up, like,
great
hey,
idea.
we're at Article 20,
Oh,
make your way over,
It's a great idea.
If someone could collect numbers, at when, I don't know, do you have to go there first? I'm trying to remember how it
You
works.
have to pick up a card.
You go,
and
yeah.
You
and
have
then
to
you can-
prove that you are a citizen.
Yeah.
And you're
probably
registered.
come first thing in the morning.
And then you get your card, and they say, all right, now, number 19, it's voted by this, and this is this,
Yeah.
and how many want it, how many don't?
Right,
and they
right,
count
that's
them.
right, yeah.
So-
And I know it was hard for me to sit there all day long, and I did,
yeah,
and then
me
it was
too.
so disappointing. So, trying to find clever ways to make, I don't know, more people understand that this is not like going to cause chaos in Nottingham. Like, I don't know, but do you have any experience with finding out what it is in communities that are stopping people and sort of addressing that?
Yeah, so usually it's a combination of things. So from the municipal side of things, it's usually the town attorney that will come out and say that this shouldn't be supported. It doesn't align with current land use statutory laws in the sense of in New Hampshire, we're what's called a Dillon's Rule state. So the municipality, the corporate body of the municipality only has authority to legislate on things that the state of New Hampshire specifically says it can. So if the state is silent on something, you, as an individual within your municipality, have no authority to address it. The state must specifically enable the municipality in order for them to legislate on it. So that when the attorneys are saying, this is unconstitutional or illegal, they're looking at it from that legal doctrine that we are what's called a Dillon's Rule state. State's the parent, municipality is the child. And so the difference that most lawyers don't understand is that they're not receiving education about like constitutional law and rights. They're getting their training, municipal lawyers are getting their training in municipal law. And so we look at it and say, you can look at the New Hampshire Constitution. So a lot of it's education is really what I'm getting at. You can look at the New Hampshire Constitution, you can see that the second part, which is the form of government, is intended to uphold the first part, which is the Bill of Rights. So the second part, the form of government, serves to protect the first part. And there's an article in our Constitution that says if that's not happening, then the rights that we kind of give up, to form a society, to say that we're going to live amongst each other, right? And we're going to give up some freedoms and rights, natural rights in order to do that, is actually null and void if we're not receiving that reciprocal of the intent and purpose of government, which is to protect our rights. So all of that to say that education, so public meetings like this are really good. So having more of them, maybe possibly scheduling another one between now and the town meeting is a possibility. A lot of that really is up to the community group. So I'm here to assist with organizing and support the community group, but the community group knows what's best, for the community. So
Join us.
We have an
participating
opening.
for sure is very important.
Yeah.
So one aspect is what the municipality is being told, what the governing body, the select board, is being told, which influences the voting public, right? So that's one part of it. So understanding why they're saying what they're saying, and then understanding that there's a different perspective on all of that we're not usually aware of. And so learning about that perspective, which means joining the group, or at least spending time with them and reaching out and asking questions. And then the other aspect of that is definitely simplifying.
Yeah.
And so Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund has gone through and really tailored these down as far as making them shorter, simplifying them. That still goes back to the community group. It's up to the community group if they want to add things in, if they want, this is about local lawmaking. And right now, who actually gets to make those decisions about the things that matter most to you? Is it really you?
It took us 6 months to get to this.
Yeah, I'm sure, and then people are still probably gonna pick it apart, and,
I like the group
But that's
texting idea, that's,
I like that, too.
We have
I
to
don't know how
figure
to
out
do
how to
it.
some way to just make it easier, because I know there were people that I was with at the beginning of the day that would have voted for
Right.
it, but they were just like, yeah,
I saw
gotta go, you know?
plus votes go out at about an hour before the vote went. I saw a few people leave.
Yeah.
But I would say that
Pages also.
we've got handouts, and if you know people that are concerned about the health of their family, whether they've got little children or elderly, the human body is like between 70 and 80% water. We have to have water to survive, and if the water that we take in is poison, we'll survive for a little bit. If the water we take in is good, we'll survive a lot longer. So people who are concerned about the well-being of their family members, I think it'd be a no-brainer. Poison my family, keep the poison out of my family. Okay, you got my vote. You got my vote.
It
It's
seems
easy.
like that, and then there's these people that like ask these questions that I wouldn't be able to answer, like I'm not
Well, some
that.
people are in a business that would be affected by this.
Right.
You know, if a contractor came in who wanted to do a large development and didn't care about the water quality and said, this is no good. I'll give you 20 different reasons that I can't make $1 billion on it.
Yeah.
So you have to kind of go with your heart.
I was willing to fight, because
Yeah.
I was involved in a fight with USA Springs, and I had guns pulled on me.
Yeah.
that was
Intimidation
quite
tactics.
direct, but nobody
Don't want to get involved.
Yeah. But I mean, it really goes back to that kind of like our revolutionary ancestors, how much do we believe the rights that we claim that we have, or how much do we believe the rights that we believe we have, which I know is kind of an odd way of saying it. But, when we think about rights, we think, live free or die state, which, when we look at the structure of law and government within this state, that really means nothing. So what means something is what are the citizens going to actually do with it? And that's what the rights-based ordinances are about, is citizens taking that responsibility and saying, we are accountable to our community, we are accountable to ourselves, and we're accountable to the ecosystems around us. And so this is how we feel best, in your community, to protect that, and to not only be able to have a different narrative about it should a lawsuit come out of it, but to then be able to say that it empowers everybody in the community. Right now, legal standing is if you are in a abutter or you have some financial vested interest. That's it. So if you live across town, water doesn't know those boundaries. Water doesn't know that only the abutter can have a say, or that some financial investor can have a say. It's going to contaminate potentially the entire aquifer, which means everybody that's drawing from that. So what this does is it changes that conversation to say it empowers everybody within the community to be able to have a say in that decision-making process and that potential process that may happen to enforce it. So it changes that narrative as well, which is not an existing opportunity within our current structure of law and government.
Yeah.
So I'm also more than willing to participate in a community meeting, doing like a community rights awareness workshop, sharing this kind of information, really kind of just going through and saying, this is the structure of the system, this is how we got here, this is why communities are doing this work, and this is what's happening at the state level. Super simple
And she'll be
synopsis.
with us at the town meeting.
But
Yeah,
going
that's
back
great.
to your original point was, you definitely want to have an ordinance like this, keep the water clean. You want to make sure we can get enough votes there, right? So one question I have is, you're in a different group than us in this town. You have different connections, it's just
Sure, yeah.
age-wise, you have kids and
Yep.
all that. I'm wondering how we go about putting together a group text, or, we had talked about a phone tree, so you see how.
How old we are, telephone
Phone,
tree.
that would take such a long time.
Phone off the
Yeah.
wall and.
Yeah,
And then you would call the next person and then,
What-
you
what's
know,
this?
but.
I don't know.
Do you have any suggestion for how to go, should we announce it on Nottingham News and Information and then ask people
Yeah.
to sign up?
I mean,
or-
I would be willing to take that on as like, I can send out the group text if people want to send me their, like, then they
That
don't
would
have
be
to share their
wonderful,
number
Sarah.
publicly, but they can
Right.
send it to me and I will make sure, and I
Would
can
be
take that
great,
on.
Sarah, so
Yeah.
you could do that through whatever.
Letters to the
Okay, so-
editor are great, so
Check
what
off your
you've.
name on the sheet.
Check it off, so,
Well, so we know who you are.
oh, sure.
Oh, she's
Telephone
Sarah
number.
Chapman.
Sure, yes.
And I
Sarah
remember you
Chapman, I
from the
wrote down her
last
name.
meeting too, believe it or not. I was
Did you put
there
your,
all day.
I don't know what I even asked for on that sheet over there.
Yeah, I put,
Email.
I put it
Email address.
all,
Well,
yeah.
in the Nottingham Water Alliance group, they've done up handouts, so there's some talking points and there's information, so anyone
Yeah.
who's, willing
She's got
to
one.
pass those around
And if you want
town.
more,
to
I
assist.
I
You
have
have
them.
more.
Yeah,
I got 400 of them.
Oh, okay, I'll take a few, yeah.
We have some neighbors that, are concerned, parents, families, they might
Yeah.
be interested.
Yeah.
I'd like to say something that's related about dirty industry versus clean industry. It isn't a choice, if you kick out these stores that might have leaky gas tanks, we're not going to have any tax base and we're all going to be poor. I work for a municipality 30 miles down the road. I hired an economic developer last year. I talked to her. I said, what are the clean things that we want to get into town so that I can tell Nottingham? I work in Derry, and she's got real estate background, and she was Chamber of Commerce. She said, that solar thing is great, the solar farm, but she says, you know what else? Storage facilities. Think of it. No one lives in them. No little kids go there. You don't have to have a school for all the people's kids. And they're clean, and they're locked up at night. There was an event that we went to, maybe my wife can help me out, where it's a gymnastics kind of thing where people are doing, what was it?
Trampoline park.
Trampoline park. And I know when our kids were 10 or 12 or 8, they'd go to that and spend money. So there are some things that we can invite into town that make Nottingham a better place. You don't just have a choice between gas stations that have leaky tanks that, there's a lot of creative thinking that can go on. And there are towns out there that are, keep out those dirty, filthy, whatever they are. And if you think of it, there are companies that hire out dumpsters. And those dumpsters go to all these sites where there's demolished stuff, and then they haul it away. And then they bring them somewhere, and then they bring them back to their yard, and they hose them down. And when they hose them down, all that stuff goes in their groundwater. The town of Derry, is where I work, said no to a pretty big company who wanted to put in a dumpster rental place in the town's footprint. They said, no, we don't want that. That'd be pretty stupid. So they're electing for cleaner companies to come in that aren't going to pollute, and I think that makes sense. Not every
And
company's going to pollute.
this doesn't actually speak to permitting a new company coming in,
Yeah.
except insofar as clearly a company coming in order to establish a hazardous waste disposal facility. But if a company is coming in, is proposing to come in, I think what we would need to do is really look at what it does and what the processes are that they use, and determine whether or not it's going to result in hazardous waste as a side effect, or whatever you say, and what they're planning to do with that hazardous waste, of any kind, not just the chemicals in the water, but whatever might come out of that, so that we could then insist that they can't come unless they
Yeah, you can say no to
meet standards.
dirty industry.
Anyway, we've gone a little bit over an hour, so I don't know if there's any final
little off track.
points.
Are there any other
Well,
questions?
My only last thought was, do you ever go through like do you go into the schools and kind of influence to hopefully they filter out
Are
or
we
something?
allowed to do that?
I don't know, that's what I wondered.
That's a good point,
I'm
and
not
we-
involved with the school, my kids
We
don't
brought it
go
up
to the
last
school.
year. We had a member on the Alliance that was a school teacher, was in the school administration. And she said, no, you can't do that.
Yeah, I figured.
Unfortunately, it's a great idea, because
Yeah.
where's your future? It's in the schools, you
Right.
know?
It depends,
probably care.
though, actually. I've been invited to speak to like the Oyster River High School through their environmental class. So the question would be, just reaching out.
Yeah.
And asking if you can, do a presentation as a community group. And it's possible that they may say yes. So I'm not so sure that you can't do it. I think it's just a matter of finding out what would be the protocol about, going about it.
Or depend on
and
what
where.
age group, too.
Definitely,
the
I
middle
would say
school or-
definitely
yeah.
like high school, maybe middle school.
We don't
but-
have high
Middle.
school in town, they have to go out of town.
Well, then middle school would
Yeah.
make sense if that's what you have,
Yeah.
locally, yeah.
Thank you,
Thank you
Sarah,
very
for
much.
taking on this little job, and we will
Sarah,
all.
thank you. You're
Yeah.
a saint.
Thank you, yeah.
And-
Thank you.
And make sure you pick up some more things.
Yeah, they're in that box.
See that box?
Other questions?
Yeah.
Come on up.
I'm Regan Gardner. I think you pretty much all already know me, 110 Stage Road. I really like Sarah's idea. I think there are a couple of things we might want to think about in advance. One is I noticed last year that people were coming in and getting numbers for at least a good hour into the actual town meeting proceedings. I don't know does anybody know if there's a cutoff for when you can get a number?
No, you can number the whole
So
day.
someone could show up for the first time after they get the text
Yep.
from Sarah saying, we're at Article 24 and a half right now. It'd be a good time to come get your number. Okay, I just wanted to make sure of that. And then just thinking about how we gather the numbers for that. Do we want to broadcast it on All Nottingham, or is that going to possibly bring as many people who are coming just for that article to vote against it as to vote for it?
Rather the numbers.
If we advertise that we're going to be
Being
putting out a group
strategic
text,
about it, because
then that guy who left after he sat up here for 15 minutes will make sure all his friends come at the same time. So I don't know if
Well, one of the problems is we have no idea when the last event's going to happen.
Well, hence
no,
the,
but-
hence the texting opportunity.
Right, but,
So the people that are on that texting group are the only people that will get that text
yeah, I think you
message.
should be selective. I think,
so we might want to
Sarah's
just
gonna-
all start
yeah.
gathering names now and get them to Sarah
them to
of like
Sarah.
4 or
That'd be
5
great.
people we each know who
Yeah.
will come for that article but aren't the like diehard townies who will
Right.
sit through the whole thing every year just because they enjoy it.
and what should we give, Sarah, what should we give?
I've
people?
discovered I'm one of those
Email?
people, so I'm not making fun of that, but.
I am too, yeah.
If we're gonna get them to you,
Who's
do
there
you
all
want
day?
that by phone, by email? I mean, I know it's on the list, so I
It's a
can,
different method, which is probably a really good idea. I guess email,
okay.
yeah.
So it's okay to give your email to people who are gonna be collecting names for you? To text, okay.
And then I have 2 others.
I don't even think I really need names, because I'm just gonna be punching their numbers in, but
Oh,
by that. I guess we might as well, then we won't overlap. I don't know.
that's true.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Something like,
Well, if you want to give it some more thought, because I know my kids like to text, so whenever I want to get them, I text them, and it's just their phone number. But a lot of people don't want their phone number on some list, 'cause you never know who's going to get it.
Should I
Give
give
a couple
you,
more, oh, sorry.
do you wanna think about it more,
I'm just
or?
trying to think of the easiest way for me
Yeah.
to receive them, and if
Yeah.
I'm getting like a million emails with like a
Right.
number each of them, I'm trying to think of.
Yeah, give it some thought.
If anyone has ideas, I'm open to hearing them. Nothing's clicking immediately.
It's okay with me if everybody sends them to me and then I kind of channel them to you in bigger groups, is that?
Sure, that would
Does
be
that make
better.
sense?
Yeah, that'd be better.
And can I propose that we fine tune that after, mainly
Yeah.
because I think you indicated that you had a couple more questions?
Yeah.
You had 2 more, yeah.
I just wanted to make sure that it's clear, because I think a lot of us, or a couple of us anyway, got a little lost in the back and forth with that first gentleman who came up here. The intent of this is not to retroactively go after any pollution site or company. So, the existing landfill or something like that, anybody could sue presumably the town over having a landfill, or could sue any business in the town over contamination already. The intent of this is to make companies coming in from the outside who aren't already in here, or who aren't already here, think twice and go somewhere else instead, basically.
Yeah,
right?
it's the dirty. It's prospective, going forward, not retrospective.
And then the last, am I allowed to just kind of make a point that's not a question?
Yeah, sure.
When he was up here talking about how water contaminants used to be tested in parts per million, and now it's all parts per billion and parts per trillion, my understanding is that's because our scientific understanding of what level is tolerable to the human body has changed, and what used to be considered a safe level is now considered much, much higher than a safe level, and that's why we need to be testing in these tinier and tinier increments. And so even if the EPA or the state is saying that a certain level of some contaminant is safe today, in 10 years they might be saying, actually, everybody who drank that level in their water has cancer now, sorry. So the whole point is to be as proactive as possible and not find out later that the levels that we were allowing are safe. And I feel like I wish he hadn't left after he said that, because I wanted to point out that he was kind of making our point for us when he said, yes, now we have to test everything in parts per billion and parts per trillion now. He was kind of, I think, making our point.
And it was interesting, today, like, there was a DES representative testifying, basically saying to the legislature, don't be unrealistic about the level that you determine, because we have to be able to meet it. I mean, think about that.
Yeah.
So if we know and I don't know, I'm being hypothetical here, but let's say that we know that X level of contaminants is affecting a particular area. Basically what he's saying to the legislature is, this isn't about setting a limit that is safe or not. It's actually about setting a goal that's attainable. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's what DES was advising our state legislature, who is considering setting a PFAS level, is to say, well, the contamination is there, and the contaminants are still being pumped into the atmosphere, if you will, in various forms, so we need to come up with something realistic. And that's really unfortunate to say that there's basically, we the human beings and our ecosystems are the collateral damage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's actually worked into state statutes. And unfortunately, I don't have it in my hand at the moment. I'm kind of kicking myself for not bringing that. But it talks about, one in so many, let's say 1 in 100,000 is actually acceptable. And I'm pulling those numbers out of my hat, but there's language within our statutes that actually talk about human beings as collateral damage. We will accept so many cases of cancer or so much harm. So this changes the conversation, and it opens a conversation within the community to be able to say, how do we feel about this? And at what point do we determine that it's not okay anymore?
Yeah. When I was a teacher of high school in Melrose, the students had a smoking area on the school property. That was where they could smoke. They don't have that anymore. We got smarter about that, at least.
Well, if I'll go back to what I said earlier about the landfill, the reason why they're concerned about the kids getting sick with this rare disease is because the number is twice the number expected.
Yeah.
If it was only the number
Substantial
expected, which was 3,
That'd be
nobody'd be
okay.
worrying about it.
Or 7.
I can say, I know 2 pediatric cancer cases from Rye. One of them passed away, lost his life this past year, so.
Oh,
It's,
that,
Yeah, less.
I think Rye is one of the towns.
Yeah.
Yeah,
yeah.
yep,
It's very real,
Yeah.
very sad.
it's very horrible.
Yeah, it is. Any other questions?
Thanks for coming.
Thanks for coming.
This is great. Thank you very much for your support.
All right, and anybody who wants to go on this text list should see me. All right, and I'm gonna share with you a couple things, and thank you very much, everybody.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. I want to turn this off.